I don't think it's a secret for returning viewers that I do like early access games and that I am not a big fan of the usual stigma that people slap onto it whenever it gets mentioned. While I agree there is a lot of trash in early access, even after the Steam Greenlight days, we of course have our success stories as well that we should look at. But logically they get still overshadowed by everything that is bad, because again, there is a lot of trash in early access. Of course that is partially caused by Steam that despite attempts trying to improve, still fails in my opinion to police it properly and create a space where the concept of early access can't thrive as it should. Because I still think the concept of early access could be good. And if policed properly, the right devs could accomplish their dreams of making a game and releasing it on a platform to a wide audience. In my enthusiasm about early access games, I tried once in a while to make content about them. However, the idea that my coverage gets out of date in mere weeks, days, or just hours after uploading is not that motivating, and ultimately failed to accomplish the goals that I set for my content. So these days, with pain in my heart, I watch early access games that I've interest in from a distance and wait till it gets a full release before reviewing it. Dimensionals was one of those games. A game that claims to be the hottest Rogue-Lite turn-based RPG, and that there are lots of heroes to collect, combinations to make, and blah 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 blah. I don't care about the meaningless marketing buzzwords. Just look at the freaking art style. That looks so sick. Like a Saturday morning cartoon video game. What more do you want? Well, of course I want it to be a good and fun game. It nailed the looks, especially the looks. It looks so nice. But is it really the hottest roguelite turn-based RPG? Is it even a turn-based RPG to begin with? Well, there is only one way to find out. This is my review of Dimensionals. In Dimensionals, we follow Koa, whom together with his robot Boop gets instructed by his grandpa to assemble an old machine in his house. After tinkering with the machine for a while, it activates an unknown stone and suddenly dark creatures appear out of nowhere surrounding the two. However, in the nick of time, Koa is saved by unknown heroes called Dimensionals. They fight off the creatures and use the device to make it safely back to the Dimensional headquarters, where Koa's grandfather is waiting for him. These evil creatures Koa saw are called Spectres. They are led by the Dark Lord Ragnareth and his evil minions. Their goal is to corrupt and destroy all other dimensions. However, thus far, the Dimensionals always manage to stop him and save them. Koa joins in on this fight against Ragnareth and his army of evil minions, even getting pushed into a leader role after his grandfather heroically engages in a fight with Ragnareth to win time so that the Dimensionals can find and unite all heroes, so they have a chance to stand against Ragnareth and hopefully banish him once and for all. As mentioned before, not just by me but also this game's description, Dimensionals looks like a Saturday morning cartoon. And unsurprisingly, its plot is written as one as well. Which I have seen for some is a miss, but I kinda liked it. The atmosphere is not too serious and everything has to be taken more on face value than anything else, making the story experience rather relaxing and very unforgiving if you get into a situation where you just want to skim through the story and don't think too much about it, as characters and situations are very over the top, but there is no deeper meaning or depth to it than what is presented. Now I can understand for some that this doesn't work. Humor is selective and here it's a bit corny and simplistic. It heavily depends on tropes common in writing of cartoons, like small and loud girl, big and clueless guy, the dark mysterious dude, cute looking but fast angry girl, cool surfer boy, and everything that is in between all those things. You name it, the trope is probably found in one of these many characters. Which again, I was fine with. However, I would be lying if I didn't wish there was some depth to it all. This is where, in my opinion, the clever design and art style of Dimensionals comes in to save the day. Not just making up for the lack of depth in the story itself, but actually manage to tell a bit of story and gives character by good visual presentation of the entire game. Each character, each minute detail, even the enemies' design and movement tells a lot of story about them by just mere visuals. And while that does sound like a bit of a consolation prize, in all honesty, it's not in my opinion. As this game is a roguelite, we are more busy with gameplay than story, and we see these characters more in action with their animations and movements than with words. Don't get me wrong, it's not an excuse to not have a deeper story or skipping on character progression, and I would not have minded at all to have more depth to any of those aspects. But in the end, the game presents itself as a Saturday morning cartoon, as a comic book that you have to read at face value. And I was able to treat it as such, thanks to the amazing, impeccable art style. So therefore, I was not bothered by its so-called lack of character depth or deeper stories development, as it was presented in a different kind of way. It's so colorful, energetic, full of details and life. I absolutely adored the usage of comic panels to tell a bit of the story, and even these little details of using a comic book font and cartoon transitions in between cutscenes. It created such a nice atmosphere and an overall fun visual game to just look at. Though it can go overboard at this part as well. In later stages of the game, buffing and debuffing happens a lot and they don't stack into one animation, making stages where a lot of buffing and debuffing happens a visual flashy mess that I would describe as fireworks going off very near your face. This has its funny charm of course as well, but I would recommend playing this game in a well-lit room. A problem that I do have with this game's presentation is its inconsistency, particularly during story moments. Dialogue is mostly spoken back and forth between characters, like a visual novel. Which is fine, here characters also display animations and poses that speaks volume about the characters that they are. In rare cases you get the before mentioned comic panels, where large events of the story are shown. These give a lot of character to the game and story, but are used very sporadically throughout your entire playthrough. Maybe this is because this game used to be an early access game, where it had to sell its first chapter to early adopters very well, and therefore it went all in with comic panels and good presentation and whatnot. But after the initial first chapter and the tutorial, these comic book panels will slowly disappear. In the end, it's still fine in my opinion. Nothing to really mark as a huge problem that breaks the game or something. It's more of a, what there is fine, but it could have been more. Maybe it should have been more, because it looks so cool type of situation. And while it's not an excuse, many roguelike builders purely have a setting and a story to just set up its gameplay. And when a game like this comes by that really puts so much effort and love into presentation and art style, I am willing to look past the fact that the story is merely doing that. Because in my opinion, the ultimate goal of a roguelite game is its gameplay and the potential replay loops included in that, not the story. The game's description is not modest when it comes to what kind of gameplay they were going for and what the main focus would be. But to be frank, I found half of the definitions used to describe this game to be misplaced. And no, I'm not talking about the hottest part. Instead, I would lean more to the definition of roguelite turn-based semi-deck builder instead. If you play Slay the Spire or anything that remotely plays like it, then you know what gameplay is waiting for you here in Dimensionals. However, instead of playing cards, you are using hero skills that you find and unlock throughout your playthrough and use in combat in a turn-based fashion. Now, it might sound on paper a bit different, but to me it felt exactly like a deck builder, so hence why I said semi-deck builder and why I don't agree with the definitions used on the Steam page. But that's just my opinion and a small technicality. The game divides itself into two modes, Campaign and Master Raid. Both of course involve the roguelite gameplay, but slightly altered. Campaign mode is self-explanatory. You play through the story while going through enemy encounters and make your hero team as you go. They are however shorter versions of a complete run, and the heroes and skills available to you are predetermined per chapter. As you progress through the story, you will learn more and more about certain mechanics and how to fight certain enemies. basically serving not as just a tutorial but also a wide skill introduction to what the game has to offer to you. However, I find myself struggling quite a bit with the campaign, especially after chapter 2. The first 1.5 chapters were reasonably in terms of difficulty. I ran into some bumps on the road, but in all honesty, I still felt in control. And if I made different choices and had a bit more luck, I could overcome the challenges that were given to me. But then I entered later stages of chapter 2 and chapter 3, and the difficulty spike was quite insane in my opinion. Now, if you have to believe the past and recent patch notes, there were some errors made in how enemies should function, but outside of that, the challenges you face are very brutal here. Which at first sounds like a fun challenge. I at least felt challenged, and at that moment I wanted to overcome it. But as I thrown in a couple of tries here and there, I slowly start to believe it wasn't my skill choices, but that I just was constantly unlucky or something that was out of my control determined the outcome. It seemed like that I was constantly lacking a specific thing that I just couldn't get to overcome this challenge, which is obviously quite frustrating. And the game kept piling on to that frustration by weird design choices. Each story run can roughly take up 45 to an hour, and that's including dialogue and cutscenes. And if you lose during this chapter, you will be placed all the way back. Which should be just fine, but the dialogue and such are unskippable. After a loss, I wanted to dive right back into it quickly, but instead I had to click through to 5, maybe 10 minutes of dialogue that I didn't care for anymore because I already read it, and I just wanted to get myself a retry on the point where I lost. It got so bad at some point because of all the resets at certain chapters that I just turned on an auto-clicker whenever I lost and had to sit through dialogue and grab something to drink in the meanwhile while the program just clicked through it all. Another big frustration was the UI itself, as it sometimes can get truly in the way of not just reading numbers next to your hero, but also making it difficult to attack the enemies themselves. Then there are weird design choices around damage calculation. Each skill you use can preview the outcome of it, which surely is handy for looking ahead a couple of turns. But the game doesn't stop at damage calculation and some buffs and debuff triggers. It tells you every painstaking single detail on what your turn would do. It will tell you all sorts of things, of taking damage in return of attacking an enemy, if you gain shields out of an action, or any other trigger that can happen in the background, and most importantly, or most annoyingly more or less, if your attack would crit or not. Now, it's good that the game tells you a lot of information, especially in later runs it becomes handy where buffs and debuffs can get out of hand and there's so much being triggered all at once that keeping track of it is very difficult. But a part of me would argue that the game manages to tell you too much unnecessary information and tell you too little about the most important information. At the left side of your screen, each trigger of a skill is displayed whenever it gets triggered. But the list can be longer than the size of your screen, easily making you lose track of what is being triggered and what isn't, because, well, it's off your screen at that point. On top of that, animations can get out of hand that even things that are told to you are hard to keep track of as well. Yet when it comes to specific information, things that in my opinion can be game-changing in a run, the game doesn't tell you about it. There are skills and relics that trigger in certain amount of turns or after an X amount of hits done. Or some can only be triggered a certain amount of times per turn. Would be great if there was a turn or a hit counter for these things, right? Well, there is none of that. You have to see it in the whole list that pops up in one go, and if you have missed it, then you might think it will still trigger, when in reality, it's already at its cap. At that point, the only way you now will know if a skill gets triggered is to do another one and see the preview and know exactly what you're looking for amongst the potential 10 to 20 other triggers that it displays. This, not knowing when it will trigger, is especially annoying for cards that only trigger a certain amount of times per turn, as it can be very annoying to keep track of something that you can't really track and getting into a situation where you start to doubt if the skill is already at its max or that it doesn't properly trigger, as you don't see anything of that throughout your entire turn. In the end, the constant frustration of restarting the story mode, having to click through all the dialogue only to lose because it felt like it was not in my control, made me let go of the story mode. The challenge was great, but being forced to play with a certain party and feeling constantly unlucky or bugs ruining my experience made me just completely give up on it. And to be very honest, the problem is not the challenge, but the way it treats the roguelite aspect in this story mode. In those kind of games, failure is part of it, and usually when you fail, you gain items, levels, or things to give you a better shot the next time you dive in. But the story mode doesn't function like that at all. If you lose, and well, you have to try again with the same things, hoping that it will work out next time. Now, if the story mode would function a little bit more like a roguelite in terms of losing and winning, the difficulty spike problem kinda would be solved instantly, as the difficulty will naturally lower itself playthrough by playthrough, like how it works in the other mode that this game offers. Master Raid mode is this game's endgame, and in my opinion the bread and butter of this game, as it avoids not only the frustrating issue I had with the story mode, but it just works so well. It goes as you would expect from a roguelite game. You run through multiple levels where you face off against all sorts of enemies while slowly building and upgrading your team to eventually face off in a final showdown against multiple bosses and a final boss. Once you finish your run, you create a new party, set new goals, and go back in for another one. The main reason to keep diving into a run again and again is of course the gameplay, but also to unlock new heroes, to upgrade them, to reach higher difficulty levels, and of course to try out different combinations of heroes and skills to find a perfect balance in mechanics. For me personally, there was one more reason, which oddly enough were achievements. Now, the deck building with skills and combinations with heroes was quite interesting. There's a large variety of heroes which forms groups of themes and therefore specific builds of skills. Yet they are versatile enough that you can combine them with complete other heroes, making some very over-the-top combinations with a bit of luck. Though it does sometimes feel like the game wasn't completely designed for the combos that I ran into. In particular, the ones where instead of upgrading skills, I stick to keep duplicates and stack their power on top of one another. Even having heroes equip 3 of the same skills just to boost another hero with its effect. This logically made me ignore a lot of other cards as well, as they seemed on paper to be a lot stronger, but the potential of using dupes was much higher and in the long run more effective. Making encounters with bosses sometimes last as long as modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Duels, aka just one turn. Before my turn even started, bosses could lose almost half of their HP, and I only had to finish them off after waiting for all the buffs to be triggered. Which was very satisfying, but again, sometimes it felt like the game was not really designed for this, despite the fact that some cards have dupe protection, so the devs are aware of it. Some heroes also seem to favor a much stronger aspect of the combat than others. In particular, corruption builds seem to me to do much better in overall combat than any other aspect like poison or rage. For example, there's one hero that can do amazing damage via rage stacking, but stacking it felt like such a challenge. As in early game you can only do that via buffs that damage said hero, but you don't have much options to heal. Mostly relying on consumables that during your run take away too much money from your skill progression. Later it's a bit easier with certain other heroes, but again it's an unbalance that I ran into early on, and it stopped me from using those heroes that I want to explore. Knowing your enemy and having knowledge about their skills is of course a key aspect, which is something you will be struggling with at the early start of the game. Especially elites you can run into can be very tricky to deal with, as they can have builds that directly counter your entire party setup and destroy you in mere minutes. Which yes, can be frustrating at the beginning, but it teaches you a good lesson for the future of every playthrough that follows after that point. I do love the fact that you don't have to focus purely on the campaign to unlock all heroes in this game. If you want, you can completely ignore it, and maybe you should, and solely do the Master Raid mode instead. as you can do challenges there to unlock more heroes, which was a clever move by the devs considering, the campaign mode had its issues. For me, the Master Raid mode was the reason to keep playing and returning to the game over the weeks that I was making this review. Especially on busy days, this game hit a sweet spot. I just boot it up, do a single run, have fun and be done with it in an hour or so. Making some decent progress towards a new champion, leveling up others or unlocking new skills and getting some nice achievements on the side. And I think that is the best way to approach Dimensionals. Like a fun but casual roguelite game where you just play it for a moment, get your fun out of it, and the moment it seems like it's going to overstay its welcome, you can just put it down for later that day or tomorrow or maybe next week. I kept coming back to it despite the fact that after every run I thought it was probably my last. During recording and editing this review, I was playing at least one run a day and I had a lot of fun with it, despite it actually not having any form of story. This of course is because of the art style and the fun of the gameplay loop itself. No, Dimensionals is not something groundbreaking, not by a long shot, but look at it, it's just very nice to look at. Has great atmosphere and characters that really carried this game for me at times it was struggling. The game does have its lack of polish, over-the-top design choices and frustrating balancing issues, but all in all it's fine, it's decent, and that's how I'm going to recommend it, as just a simple, fun but flawed and unpolished roguelite game that you can buy for a decent price. So if you're interested, I say check it out.